I said to myself, we know a handful of ways to slow aging in mice. And then I thought of my dog. Sorry, I'm going to tear up because we lost him a year ago and I still can't think about it.
But, I'm so sorry.
I thought of my dog and I'm like, oh my God, I can slow aging in my dog.
What is one biohack that you think is overrated?
Most of them are overrated. I think the reason why rapamycin seems to be effective from the perspective of aging is chronic inflammation drives a lot of diseases of aging and other diseases.
Right.
And rapamycin is a very potent anti-inflammatory. And so blunting that chronic inflammation has a lot of beneficial effects throughout the whole body.
Hi guys, on today's episode, I had the honor of sitting down with Matt Kaeberlein. We were at a conference in Switzerland all about longevity, and let me tell you, he is one of the most respected people in this industry. He leads research on a drug called Rapamycin, which has actually been proven to slow aging. So if you have ever heard of this and wondered if it could be right for you, this is the episode to listen to. Enjoy. Dr. Matt Kaeberlein, thank you so much for being here. So you have kind of dedicated your career at this point to the biology of aging.
Yeah.
Was there an aha moment that inspired you to do so?
There was actually. So I went to graduate school thinking that I would study biophysical chemistry or X-ray crystallography, protein structure. So that's what my training as an undergraduate was in. And I heard a seminar after my first semester in graduate school by a guy named Lenny Guarenti, a professor in the biology department there, where he talked about how his lab, just within the last 5 or so years, had started studying the genetics of longevity. And they worked in a single-celled organism, budding yeast. And he described this sort of very elegant approach that they had taken and actually got into really what at the time was the first molecular model for a mechanism of aging. And, to this day, I don't really know why that sort of captivated me, but I was struck by the idea that you could use genetics and molecular biology and biochemistry to study the biology of aging. I don't think I even appreciated there was a biology of aging before that, right?
Right.
So after the seminar, it kind of stuck with me. I went and talked to Lenny and ended up joining his lab for my PhD thesis work. I think at the time, I didn't really appreciate or even care that much about the fact that, aging is the greatest risk factor for all these diseases and there's this huge opportunity to have an impact on health. I was fascinated by the complexity of the biology, but over time, of course, I came to appreciate that this, in my view at least, really is the most important problem in biology, biomedicine, from a human health perspective. And so for that reason, I've stayed in the field since then. Right.
And would you consider, obviously this is the Healthspan Collective. We talk a lot about the difference between longevity and healthspan. Obviously they're very interrelated, but would you say you focus more on healthspan or more on longevity?
I don't actually separate them as much in my own thinking as I think a lot of people do.
Okay.
So first of all, one thing that's worth saying is that the term longevity, in the dictionary definition, that means lifespan, right? Mm-hmm. It's come to mean something different in the way it gets used today. But if we're talking about lifespan versus health span, I think for sure our primary goal should be to maximize health span for as many people as possible.
Right.
And I would put companion animals in that category as well. But I also believe that the most effective way to do that in the long run is by targeting the biology of aging. If you slow biological aging, you will increase both lifespan and health span. So I think there is this perception that these things are, fundamentally different when in fact, at least from the angle of trying to extend, they're not really separable. And the cases that people point to in the literature where they claim that they have, made an animal live longer without increasing health span, I don't think those really hold up when you look carefully at what was done or the way that health span was assessed. I have not seen a single convincing example in a laboratory animal where somebody has slowed aging and you don't get both increases in lifespan and health span.
Yeah. I mean, as a non-scientist who tries to apply a common sense approach to everything, how could they not impact one another, right?
Yeah. I think the one thing that's worth probably mentioning explicitly. So I don't believe that it's certainly not going to be easy, and I don't believe it's likely you're going to increase lifespan and not increase health span substantially by slowing aging. But you could make the argument that's exactly what we've done with our reactive approach to healthcare in the last 50 years. Right?
Yes.
People are living much longer.
Yes.
I think it's debatable whether health span has, at the population level, has been substantially increased. Certainly some people are maintaining health much longer than they used to, but at the population level, at best, health span has been stagnant, and you could make an argument that it's actually decreased depending on how you define health span. So I think that that this concern that people have that if we slow aging, we're going to, just give people extra years at the end of life is mistaken. And in reality, that's kind of what we've done through our approach to healthcare over the last 50 years. Right.
That's kind of what we're trying to undo in this, in the industry that both you and I.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially the people who, and this is my world now, much more so than it used to be, who are really focused on, given the tools we have today, what are the approaches we can take to improve health for as many people as possible for as long as possible? To some extent, it is undoing. And again, I don't want to sound critical of the fact that we have increased life expectancy by, many, many decades in the last 50 years. That's a good thing. Keeping people alive is a good thing.
Yes.
It's just that by doing so, and honestly, most of those gains in life expectancy come from early life interventions, things that keep people from dying when they're young, right? Antibiotics being one big one, sanitation being another one, reduced childhood mortality. But as a consequence of doing that, many more people are living to an age where biological aging becomes the predominant health determinant. And that's why we see all of these diseases of aging manifest themselves, depending on your lifestyle in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so I think the place where our healthcare system has failed us is that historically we've always thought about disease through the lens of individual diseases in isolation, and we wait until people develop those diseases to do anything about it. And I mean, obviously we try to cure the disease, but in the vast majority of cases, what we really end up doing is treating the symptoms. And so that mindset, which was logical 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, before people appreciated that biological aging is modifiable. But because of that mindset, we have been successful at keeping sick people alive, but we have not been very successful at keeping people healthy into old age at a societal level. Yes,
I agree. I think we have extended lifespan without extending health span, but I think when your goal is to extend health span, you'll likely extend lifespan as well.
That's very likely. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think most of the approaches that we are confident can extend health span in people have the effect of also increasing lifespan.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of by nature.
I think a related question, and this is something where, I would say the jury is still out, is whether, the interventions in animals that we know about that slow aging, increase lifespan, they definitely increase health span. I think the question is, do they proportionally increase health span, and then let's just call the rest of life sick span, right? The period at the end of life. Are those proportionally increased when we increase lifespan? In other words, if we increase lifespan by 20% by slowing aging, do you get a 20% increase in health span and 20% increase in sick span? I don't think we know that for sure, but all of the data I've seen suggests that we do indeed get a larger increase in health span. There's this phenomenon that people have labeled compression of morbidity. That just means pushing the diseases of aging back as late as possible. And it really looks like these interventions that seem to slow aging in laboratory animals compress morbidity. And I think you can make, a reasonable case that the lifestyle interventions that we believe slow aging in humans also compress morbidity, right? Eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly. It appears that people not only live longer, but maintain health later into that extended period of lifespan.
It's all about closing, what is it? The last that last decade of life, gap.
Yeah, and that's kind of like why I like the term sick span, because I think
I haven't heard that before, but I like it.
I sort of made it up.
Yeah,
but I did that because there are so many different definitions of health span. Like nobody can agree on a way to measure health span quantitatively, which is why you'll hear some people say that the gap is 9 years. You'll hear other people say the gap is 25 years, right? It all depends on how you're defining health span. But if we define sick span as the period of life with one or more chronic diseases, that's easy to measure because we can define when somebody develops their first chronic disease. And at least in the United States, the CDC estimates that 60% of Americans have a chronic disease, which is shocking when you think about it. The median age in the United States is about 38 years. The life expectancy is about 78 years. So those numbers tell us that a large proportion of the population is spending many decades in sick span.
Right.
And we just want to make that sick span period as small as possible.
Right. I love that. So you are a researcher, former professor, but now you're also the CEO of a company called Optispan.
Yeah.
What made you want to go in that direction?
Yeah, so there were multiple factors, as there often are when people make a major life change, major career change. I think I realized even before the pandemic that I was pretty burnt out in my academic career. Not that I didn't. I mean, I still obviously love science, and I love the biology of aging and trying to disentangle what's really going on there. But I felt like I was spending so much of my time doing things that just didn't matter, just bureaucratic time sink. And so for me, I'm very much somebody who's motivated by wanting to have an impact, wanting to make a difference. And when you feel like 80% of your time is spent doing stuff that doesn't make a difference, it's really hard to continue to stay motivated. So I tell this story now. I didn't really talk about this much, but I actually was at a conference in 2019, and when you're in a field, a lot of times it's the same people giving the same talk. You just go on the conference circuit, right? And so I'd seen the same talks, and so I was kind of half paying attention, looking around the room, and I start looking at people who are 15, 20 years senior to me in the field, and I asked myself, do I want to be them in 20 years? And it was crystal clear in my mind. I mean, it was crystal clear. No, I do not want that future for myself. So that's when I kind of opened my mind to other possibilities. And I didn't immediately quit academia or anything like that, but I just became open to other opportunities. Took a look at a couple of biotech positions as a chief science officer. Neither one was exactly the right fit. And then I was really fortunate to meet a guy named Dave Saby, who started a company called Saby Corporation. They're probably the largest privately held data center company in the world. But he's also this sort of, really visionary, really smart guy who he's interested in a lot of stuff, but he's been interested in healthcare, all of the problems with healthcare that we sort of alluded to already, and how do we make it better? Right. And he's also been interested in science and biology, and he is a good friend of a sort of famous scientist in the systems biology world named Lee Hood. Lee's a brilliant guy. Lee developed this idea of P4 medicine, which is, personalized, preventative, proactive, participatory. And so Dave and Lee had a series of ventures together in this space. So he'd been thinking a lot about what's wrong with healthcare, what can we do? I got introduced to him, and we just spent about a year throwing ideas around with the common vision that we just want to improve health for as many people as possible by as much as possible. Yeah. It was really sort of that simple. What can we do? Yeah. Threw around a lot of ideas and sort of settled on what has become Optispan, which is really to create enabling technology for medical professionals who want to do best-in-class, evidence-based, what I call healthspan medicine. Okay. And the reason I use that term is only because it's longevity medicine, but longevity medicine, I think, already has sort of a connotation to it that is not great. I mean, even when I say it, I'm kind of like, ugh. So I think healthspan medicine doesn't yet have that. I don't know if that's what we'll end up calling it, but it is just medicine that is evidence-based, science-based, proactive, preventative, personalized, participatory. What are the tools we can use now to bring this to as many people as possible? So that's what Optispan is.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm laughing because I had all of those thought processes even trying to name the podcast. I was like, I really don't. And a lot of people do just associate one with the other, Healthspan with longevity. And sure, there's that like obvious correlation as we've talked about. But I wanted it to be very clear. My goal with my work and myself is Healthspan, focusing on enhancing Healthspan. And for me, it's even, at 31 trying to optimize fertility.
Which great, by the way. You are so far ahead of certainly where I was in thinking about my own health, and a lot of people. It's fantastic that you're already there and doing it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was, it's one of those things I think a lot of people in this industry, especially in the patient-facing side of it, have dealt with their own health struggles, and that's how you kind of got into it, right? And that was me. I've, had PCOS for many years, and just kind of the slew of chronic inflammatory conditions that you have when you tend to burn yourself out working too hard and, just trying to take over the world, generally. But yes, I love that that's your mission. So you're providing, are you patient facing at Optispan?
Yeah. So again, I think of us as a healthcare technology company, but I really felt that in order to be able to build those enabling scaling tools, we needed to have our own clinical experience. And I mean, again, healthcare in the U.S. is complicated and it's hard and it's messy and there's all sorts of regulations. And so I really felt like we needed to have our own clinics in order to be able to understand what are the friction points, what works, what doesn't work, where can you engage with the regulations that are in place, and where are you just going to be blocked, right? So yes, we do have two clinical programs, patient facing, client facing, and people participating in our clinical programs. One is along the lines of the sort of Peter Attia high-end concierge model. We're not as expensive as Peter. Peter's a friend of mine, by the way. Don't take that the wrong way.
I think you can have an expensive program and that not be a.
But it is high-end concierge, right? I mean, it's for people who can afford it. It's out of pocket because insurers don't pay. That's just the reality right now. And those programs are good in the sense that they enable you to do a lot and figure out what works, what doesn't work, where's the value, what are things that you would do if money was no object, but you don't, they're sort of incremental in the value they bring. I'm talking about diagnostics and experimental therapies and things like that. And that has allowed us to then also create what I think is a pretty good corporate healthcare program. And by that, all I mean is we're trying to find something that's kind of at the price point that companies would be willing to invest as a recruitment, retention, employee health program, but that's very much a science-based proactive healthcare program. And so those are the two programs we have. In our concierge clinic, we have some tiers, but they're all sort of, out of pocket, high-end experiences where there's lots of diagnostics, lots of personalization, coaching is involved. And then we've tried to figure out, what's the 80-20? Where can we get 80% of that value for 20% of the cost? I think we can actually do better than that. I'm now 90-10, 95-5. Like how close can we get to that very, very comprehensive experience at a price point that will allow us to engage a lot more people?
Cool. So would that program, the non-concierge program that you're kind of targeting, corporations and whatnot, would it be all telemed or would people still be going to clinics?
I mean, I think there's variation. So in our corporate healthcare program, it can be either, but we prefer in person, right? So we prefer FaceTime with the doctor, but it doesn't need to be. I think, again, I try hard to be as pragmatic as possible here and, think about what's going to work the best, right? The other thing I'll say is I really feel like going forward, just with the way the AI-based tools have evolved only in the last year, I mean, it's sort of crazy to think about it. I mean, we were, like a lot of people, we were thinking about, okay, so how are these new LLMs going to help us do what we want to do, 16 months ago or whatever. And we started having these ideas about what we could do with them, and then all of a sudden we're doing it, right? And they're not perfect, but they're going to keep getting better. And so I think the opportunities there are to figure out how do we use these tools as effectively, efficiently, responsibly as we can to enable doctors to scale themselves, right? And that's what we've been doing in our clinic. And it's sort of amazing how well that works already. So I just think that's going to get better. I'm not trying to be, too naive but I'm really pretty optimistic that this will happen. There are going to be bumps along the way, but I do think the AI technologies in healthcare will eventually have a big impact on healthcare disparities. I see a path pretty clearly to where pretty much anybody who wants it at a price point that a lot of people can afford. Maybe, again, I don't know exactly what it's going to be. $100 a month, right? Can get you 80% of what we do in our high-end program. With the AI tool.
That is
We're not there yet,
affordable.
but I think we can get there. Yeah. And again, people should be willing to spend $100 a month on their own health. You should be willing to spend a lot more than that if you can.
Yeah.
Because, look, you only get one body.
Yeah.
But again, I'm pretty optimistic that for people who want it, this will be available. I think that the challenge I see in the space is more around how do you separate the signal from the noise? Because there's so much out there. There's so much nonsense that for the average consumer, how are they going to be able to figure out who to trust, who's real, with my finite resources that I have if I'm an average person, where do I invest that to have the biggest impact on my health? Right now, it's really, really hard in this space.
Yeah, it is. But you're doing the Lord's work because it truly is. I think that it's something that if we can provide it, because it's so cool for those that can afford it right now to be part of these concierge programs. And obviously, someone like Peter Tia's program is on the higher end of the scale. I have clinics where we have options on the lower end of the scale and kind of like the medium to high, depending on what you consider high, right? But to be able to provide, 90%, 80% of that care for $100 a month is going to be really, I really look forward to that day.
And I do want to give a shout out to Peter as well, because at least for me personally, and I know this is true for a lot of people, he has had a huge impact on the way I think about, what does this even look like, right?
I agree. I totally agree. He is so inspiring.
Yeah. So, I think that, the people who are his patients, great for them.
Yeah.
He's got a fantastic program.
He's got a fantastic program, and he does a lot of great PR for this work as a whole.
Yeah.
A lot of people have heard of the work that we're doing because of him, right? I can't tell you how many, he was just on 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people sent me clips relating it to what we do at my clinics. And I'm like, this is so cool that this is like becoming mainstream news and media, right? So I did see on your website for Optispan, you have the Helix Core, which is a one-day experience.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what is the client experience for the Helix Core?
Yeah. So the Helix program is sort of our full program where it's an ongoing program and people are in it, as long as they want to be, hopefully for many, many years. Right. Helix Core is really just for those people who want to get the data. They want to get that one-time snapshot or maybe annually on all of the diagnostics that we think are the core, right? And there are things in the full Helix program that aren't part of the core, but those are usually things like whole body MRI or advanced cardiac screening that we don't do for everybody. It's for people who want it or we have a specific reason to do it for them. So Helix Core is people will obviously give us information before they come in about their health history, current lifestyle approaches, things like that. They come in for the day. They will usually start with a fasted blood draw because we want to get that done. People haven't eaten. It's a pretty so the Helix Core panel is the same as our Helix panel. Very comprehensive. Covers all of what we think of as systems of health in a lot of depth. Again, if you look around at the landscape in this space, there's at least at the legitimate clinics, there's an overlapping set of blood work that you're going to do.
Of course.
We'll have some that other people don't. They might have some that we don't. But I feel like ours is really, really solid and really comprehensive. So get that done first. We do point of care ultrasound as a screening tool. And then after that, We also have multi-cancer detection tests. So we use the Gallery test right now for multi-cancer detection. And then that combined with whole body MRI, I think gives us a very good feel for if anybody has a pre-existing cancer that's concerning.
Is the Gallery test a scan?
No, it's a blood
It is a blood test.
Yeah, so the Gallery test uses epigenetics. It's not a biological age test, but it uses epigenetic signatures in blood to detect almost 30 different cancers.
Okay.
What you get back is really just a cancer detected or cancer not detected signal.
Okay.
So from my scientist side, I'm like, gosh, I wish they would give more data. But I understand why they do that. And then if a cancer is detected, they give you a probable tissue of origin. Because in the epigenetic signature, you can tell with some degree of certainty what type of cancer it likely is. And then obviously if you get a positive signal, and this is something about the Gallery that, I think with any of these advanced diagnostics, communication with the client is really, really important.
Yes.
Make sure they understand what we're testing, why we're testing it. And with some of these things like Gallery, MRI is the same, there is a likelihood of some, you can tell them the statistics, some percentage likelihood that you're going to get a false positive. In other words, it's going to say there's something detected, doesn't turn out to be a real cancer.
Right.
So the drawback to the Gallery test is that if you get a cancer detected signal, it's really only about a 50% chance on follow-up you're going to find a cancer.
Okay.
So, that doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's like a coin flip, right?
Right.
So people need to understand that going in, and we try to have a conversation about, to try to understand, is this going to create more anxiety than it's worth from the preventative viewpoint? Right.
And that's a big kind of topic of conversation amongst all these diagnostics as a whole. I've heard that argument a lot for Prenuvo, for example, the whole body MRI.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of these things may have taken care of themselves, or they may be a false positive, and they can cause more anxiety.
Yeah, with cancer, that's a real challenge because our immune system is constantly clearing cancers, right? And so I don't think we know at this point. Maybe the people who've done a lot of this by MRI, they may have a feel for this. I don't think we really know at this point how often a blip that gets picked up and then it turns out not to be a cancer. It just got cleared. Right?
Okay.
And there are lots of cysts that are non-cancerous,
right.
but it's invasive to get those diagnosed, things like that. So all of that's to say it's just important for the team to understand what the benefits and drawbacks of any diagnostic or screening test you're doing are, and be able to communicate that to the client. So we do the Gallery as part of the blood draw. Get that all out of the way with the blood draw. Everybody gets a DEXA. I think DEXA is super powerful tool. I mean, this is something I think should just be put in primary care. Like everybody should get a DEXA.
Yes.
Maybe once, people will argue about like how often should we do it at the population level. Maybe once a year is too often, but it's only $50. So I would suggest it's worth it to invest in doing a DEXA.
And at what age do you think people should start doing a DEXA?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a single right answer to that. It sort of depends on you. It sort of depends on your current health status, whether you're obese. I don't see a downside to starting, in your 20s.
Yeah.
But certainly by the time you're in your 40s, because then you're going to start to pick up loss of bone density, visceral adipose, which is going to drive metabolic dysfunction. I mean, it would be good to know if you've got low bone density or higher than optimal visceral adipose in your 20s and 30s. So again, I think that's a reasonable time to start, but certainly by the time you're in your 40s.
Yeah. Yeah. I generally hear between 30 and 35 is a nice place to start because that's when I think it's at 35, your bone density starts declining generally. And
yeah, again, that's a population average. So different people are going to be different. This is where, if you start with low bone density in your 20s and you knew that, you could take steps to
start combating
reduce or prevent the loss as you get older. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So anyways, just to go back to finish out what the day looks like. So DEXA, and then, people will eat, we'll have a light breakfast and then do a physical assessment. So we do VO2 max testing. We have a Cosmed on site. We do strength, agility, flexibility assessments. And then take a shower. And then there's usually, an hour and a half with the coach and the doc to kind of talk about where the person is at. And this is where you try to understand, in terms of their lifestyle and emotional health and mental health, what their situation is. I mean, our goal after the core, particularly for people who continue in the full program, is really to be able to identify a health optimization plan for them that is going to give the biggest bang for the buck, and by that I mean for effort, that we can, right? Because look, humans are about seeing change, instant gratification. That's one of the challenges with modifying lifestyle, right?
Yes.
Is that you don't usually see it immediately. It takes some time. Whereas if you're hungry and you really like McDonald's, you get that instant gratification right away, even though it's not great for you. So that's what that piece is about. The other thing I didn't mention that we do that is, I think, not standard yet is we have an oral screening tool called an iTero, which basically just takes a series of images of the inside of the mouth. It's used in dentistry a lot.
Okay.
And then we have a dentist who consults for us to take a look at oral health. We know oral health is important for the health and the rest of the body, but, for cultural reasons, we have chosen to separate dentistry from the rest of medicine, which doesn't make any sense, but that's the reality. So people don't usually think about oral health when they're thinking about optimizing their health overall.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the first, Healthspan longevity company I've heard really involving oral care, which is so important.
And again, I just, this is sort of an accident of my career that I feel fortunate about. So when I was still at the University of Washington studying aging biology in mice, we'd done a bunch of experiments with rapamycin in mice showing that, we could take old mice, give them rapamycin for 3 months and get big increases in lifespan.
Right.
And a DDS PhD, so it's like an MD PhD, except this is a dentist who's also getting a PhD, came to my office and is like, I'm really interested in aging. Have you ever thought about aging of the oral cavity? And I'm like, no. Why haven't I ever thought about that? And he proceeded to, show me the data that if you have periodontal disease, you're at higher risk of cardiovascular disease and kidney disease and dementia and diabetes. And so I was like, yeah, you should do that. Why don't you come to my lab? So he did. And
cool.
This is a doctor named Jonathan Ahn, who's now a faculty member at University of Washington. And he designed these series of experiments where the first thing we did was we just asked, do mice in the laboratory show aging of the oral cavity? And what does that look like? And it turns out it looks very much like periodontal disease in people.
Really?
So you see loss of bone around the teeth, you see inflammation of the gums, gingivitis, and you see pathological remodeling of the oral microbiome. Those are kind of the 3 clinically defining features of periodontal disease in people.
Okay.
And so that happens during normal aging in mice in the laboratory. And then he asked the question, what happens if we give them rapamycin? And so he gave old mice that already had loss of bone around the teeth, gingival inflammation, changes in the microbiome. He gave them rapamycin, and over a period of 12 weeks, we saw all 3 of those things go the other direction. I mean, it's not surprising that rapamycin would knock down inflammation, but it was very, very robust. It was very surprising that the mice regrew bone, so we could see in the same mouth, the same mice, more bone after 12 weeks of rapamycin.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was striking. And this is by micro CT. And then we saw the microbiome is complicated. We saw changes in the microbiome that are at least consistent with a partial reversion back to the more youthful state. Now, that could be because there's less inflammation. And of course, inflammation is just activation of our immune system.
Right.
Our immune system is always interacting with our gut microbiome, our oral microbiome. And so if you're really inflamed, that's why so many people who have chronic inflammation have gut problems.
Right.
If you're really inflamed, that's going to have an effect on your microbiome.
Right.
And if rapamycin is reversing that chronic inflammation, it's maybe not surprising that we see partial reversion of the microbiome back to a more youthful state.
So
that's what got me thinking about oral health. Otherwise, I wouldn't. And so anyways, when we set up our clinical program, it was like, we need to do something to look at that. Yeah. Other things we do are fairly standard. We do a skin cancer screening by imaging test, cognitive assessments, things like that.
Okay. Awesome. I want to come see your clinic one day.
Come up to Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, I would love that. I really would. But you brought up something else that I wanted to ask you about, which is rapamycin. Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of research in this area. It seems like it can be a little bit controversial as if it should be considered this kind of like longevity drug that we should all be using, or health span drug that we should all be using.
Sure.
Can you give us, for somebody, you gave us just a little bit of information about it, but can you give, for somebody who's maybe never heard of it, a general rundown, and then what's the latest research and your take on it?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to. I'll start with just saying that if you don't know the story of rapamycin, you should go check it out. It's really interesting. It was discovered on Easter Island, which is also called Rapa Nui, in the soil there. There's this very cool story about one of the scientists who was working on it early on. I won't give away the story, but you should check it out. It's out there on the internet. It's a fascinating story. Rapamycin, as I mentioned, it was found in the soil on Easter Island. It's produced by bacteria. So it's produced by a bacteria called Streptomyces hygroscopicus. Okay. There's your science trivia for the day. So it is, in some sense, a natural product in the sense that it's produced in nature, but it's not in our bodies. And what rapamycin does is it's an inhibitor of a protein called mTOR. mTOR stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. So they were not inventive when they named mTOR. Okay. The drug was discovered before the protein was discovered. So that's why it's called
so
mTOR.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so what mTOR is it is really one of the key gatekeepers in every non-bacterial cell, eukaryotic cell, every non-bacterial cell that we know of. mTOR plays this really fundamental role in sensing the environment and helping the cell make the decision, is the environment appropriate for growth and reproduction, or is it better to turn off growth, stop cell division, and become stress resistant? That's an oversimplification, but it's a pretty good oversimplification of what mTOR does. And the primary thing mTOR senses, although it does sense other things, is nutrient status, how much food is available in the environment. And again, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, every cell, every organism, every animal that has ever existed has to make this decision. It has to sense the environment and then decide, is it a good time to have babies? Because from an evolutionary perspective, if you have babies when there's not any food around, that's a really bad decision, right? So mTOR fundamentally makes that decision. And rapamycin is a small molecule that inhibits mTOR. And inhibiting mTOR is the kind of the same signal that you get when there's not very much food around. So when there's lots of food around, mTOR activity gets turned up. That tells the cell or the organism to grow and reproduce. Okay. When there's not very much food around, mTOR gets turned down, and that's a signal to turn off reproduction and growth and become stress resistant. Rapamycin turns down mTOR even when there's lots of food around. So it's kind of what people call a partial caloric restriction mimetic. It's kind of mimicking many of the effects of caloric restriction. And caloric restriction turns down mTOR, or fasting turns down mTOR. That's thought to be part of the mechanism for how caloric restriction and fasting slow aging in laboratory animals, is by turning down mTOR.
How does autophagy play a part in all
so
this?
mTOR regulates autophagy. mTOR is an inhibitor of autophagy. So this is where you have to kind of map it out. But rapamycin is an inhibitor of mTOR. So mTOR, when it's on, turns autophagy down. Right? When you turn down mTOR, you turn up autophagy.
Which is what you want.
Is released. Well, autophagy, none of these things are all or nothing. Right. So autophagy is kind of referred to as the cellular recycling center. It basically, depending on the type of autophagy, either non-specifically grabs stuff from inside the cell and degrades it, or if it's certain types of autophagy, can specifically go after, mitochondria or other cellular components, right? So that's good when you have lots of damage, right? But if your autophagy is cranking on all the time, that's a bad thing. You don't want to constantly be degrading functional parts of your cell. So all of these things need to be in balance. I think the reason why rapamycin seems to be effective from the perspective of aging is there's a couple things that people have uncovered. One, it seems as though in many tissues and organs, mTOR becomes hyperactivated with age. In other words, the signals that would normally tamp down mTOR aren't working the way they're supposed to. One of the hallmarks of aging is dysregulated nutrient sensing. That's kind of what this is referring to, that mTOR seems to be hyperactivated. Not true everywhere, maybe not true in every person, but in general, that seems to be the case, at least in laboratory animals. Then the other thing is, pretty much across the board in mammals, with age, we experience more chronic, what's called sterile inflammation, meaning it's activation of the immune system inappropriately sterile, not against pathogens it should be responding to, but against things it probably shouldn't be responding to. That's where this idea of inflammaging comes from. And inflammation, chronic inflammation, drives a lot of diseases of aging and other diseases.
Right.
And rapamycin is a very potent anti-inflammatory. I already alluded to this when I talked about the oral cavity.
Right.
And so blunting that chronic inflammation has a lot of beneficial effects throughout the whole body. That's probably what underlies, many of the things that we see in mice if we treat aged mice with rapamycin. So it's not only autophagy, it's probably not only inflammation. There's other things that mTOR does as well. It affects metabolic state, mitochondrial function, protein synthesis. So it's probably more than one thing that's accounting for all of the effects we see from rapamycin in laboratory animals. So getting back to your original question, though, so what do we know about longevity? So I can tell you with confidence in laboratory animals, and I'm going to talk mostly about mice, but it's worth saying that in every laboratory animal where rapamycin has been tested, it's been shown to increase lifespan. And to the point that we can assess healthspan metrics, improve healthspan. It's true in yeast, it's true in nematode worms, it's true in fruit flies, it's true in mice, and it's been replicated by multiple labs in all of those systems. So this is really, with the exception of caloric restriction, I would say the gold standard for a longevity intervention because it is the second most effective in terms of magnitude of effect, longevity intervention, to caloric restriction. And it's the most reproducible. And the one place where it might be better than caloric restriction is in mice at least, there's a very strong genetic effect of caloric restriction, meaning some backgrounds respond very well, some are actually harmed. That's true also in other organisms. Whereas at least where it's been tested, rapamycin seems to always have the lifespan increasing effect.
Interesting.
The other thing that's worth noting, though, is it goes beyond lifespan. This gets to the healthspan question. In, again, almost every tissue and organ where people have looked, if you treat mice with rapamycin throughout life, function is preserved at the functional level, at the molecular level. And in at least a few tissues and organs, you can actually improve function if you start in an aged animal. So I talked about the oral cavity, the heart. This has been replicated multiple times now. 4, maybe 5 labs have shown that, with age, there's declines in heart function in mice. You can make it function more like a young heart within 8 weeks of treatment with rapamycin. The brain, lots of data, both in normal aging and Alzheimer's disease models, that you can improve function in the context of an aged animal. The immune system, which surprises a lot of people because rapamycin gets talked about as an immune suppressant, and at high enough doses, it will have that effect.
Right.
But in the context of aging, because we have this increase in chronic inflammation, our immune system is less able to respond to the pathogens it's supposed to respond to because it's like it's too much noise.
Right.
Don't know what to do. If you give mice 6 weeks of rapamycin, you knock down that inflammation. They're better able to respond to a flu vaccine than aged mice, as good as the young mice, apparently. And the other area is the ovary. So there have now been a few labs that have shown you can reverse declines in ovarian function in mice with rapamycin treatment.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's all in laboratory animals. So I feel very confident in saying rapamycin slows aging in laboratory animals, and at least a few places can improve function that's already declined with age. I also want to make the point, that's not reversing aging. At least in the context of making an old animal into a young animal.
Right.
So improving health, restoring function is not the same as reversing aging. That term gets misused a lot, unfortunately. But it's still great. That's a great thing, right?
Yeah.
So now the question is, what do we know in people? So one of the challenges is rapamycin is off patent. It's FDA approved.
Right.
So we have a fair amount of safety data, a lot of safety data in people. We know the doses where there are significant side effects. We know some dosing strategies where there don't appear to be really much in the way of any concerning side effects.
Okay. Because what is it traditionally used for?
Yeah. So it was first approved as an organ transplant rejection drug for kidney transplant rejection, I believe. It's been used for other types of organ transplants. It's never used alone. It's always used in combination with other immunosuppressants, and it's always used at higher doses than people are using now off-label for potential healthspan protective doses. So that the fact that it's already approved and off patent means no pharmaceutical company is going to put money into the clinical trials that we would need to get definitive evidence for other things rapamycin might be beneficial for, like Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
So I'll come back to that.
Okay.
So now we have a lot of smaller studies, some of them, very small, 8 people, some of them larger. There were 2 phase 2 clinical trials done by a fantastic scientist named Joan Manick. This was in the 2010 to 2018 timeframe, where they looked at the immune function I talked about in mice. So they took healthy elderly people, gave them 6 weeks of a derivative of rapamycin. So it works just the same way. It's an mTOR inhibitor, exactly the same biochemical mechanism, just a little chemical tweak to it. So I think it's okay to think of it as rapamycin. So they gave that to healthy older people for 6 weeks, and then they stopped for 2 weeks, and then they gave them a flu vaccine. And lo and behold, they saw the same thing that was seen in mice. Respond better to the flu vaccine.
Really?
Yeah. Wouldn't it have been nice during the COVID pandemic
I was
to have something
just
that
about
made
to say that
the immune system of elderly people respond better to a vaccine? So anyways, since then, there have been a series of studies, some small, some reasonably sized, some N of 1, that I think make a pretty compelling case that rapamycin, both because of its anti-inflammatory effects and because it boosts antiviral gene expression, is really effective in people who have chronic conditions post-viral infection. Think long COVID, think chronic fatigue syndrome after Epstein-Barr virus, right? There was a study that just came out within the last 3-4 months. Really nice study. It's not a gold standard, randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. These are all patients taking rapamycin in clinics off-label, but they did it in a designed way where they gave the people the same dose over the same period of time. There's all people with chronic fatigue syndrome, and something like 3/4 of them showed dramatic improvement in their symptoms. And when they subgrouped them, the people who showed improvement, by and large, were people whose chronic fatigue syndrome was post-viral infection. So it's making a compelling case. And this is where I think, in the world that we live in today, where clinical trials, FDA-level clinical trials, are so expensive that only big pharma can afford to do them, we have to get comfortable with the idea that we may never have that level of data for some of these things. And so I feel pretty confident that for a lot of people with chronic fatigue syndrome, rapamycin is a really great option. And there's almost nothing to lose in the sense that the risk is pretty low. It's not zero. Nothing has zero risk. But there are enough people who've used rapamycin off-label by now that we know what the risks are. And really, the most common side effect is canker sores. About 15% of people will get canker sores.
Okay.
Outside of that, there's nothing that I've seen that reaches statistical significance. There might be a slightly increased risk of bacterial infection.
Okay.
Certainly some people are going to get GI distress, but that happens even with the placebo. So there's nothing that really rises above the placebo signal convincingly. So from my mind, 15% chance of getting canker sores is not a huge concern when you're trying to do this risk reward.
Right.
If you're somebody who's had chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID and it's dramatically, affecting your quality of life.
Right.
So that's one area. The other area where I'm becoming more bullish is in Alzheimer's disease, maybe other dementias as well, maybe traumatic brain injury. That's completely speculative on my part.
Okay.
But I think there might be a there. But with Alzheimer's disease, particularly people who are ApoE4 carriers or homozygous. So ApoE4 is the largest genetic risk factor for dementia. It's also a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So a couple of studies have been done in ApoE4 carriers using, I think, pretty good tools. Brain MRI, assessments of cerebral blood flow, so blood flow to the brain. We know those are affected early in people who are going to develop Alzheimer's disease, at least some people who are going to develop Alzheimer's disease. And so they were able to show, again, small studies, but 2 different studies, that you can see improvements in brain volume, at least in certain regions of the brain, the hippocampus and caudate nucleus, after a few weeks, 8 weeks of rapamycin treatment. You can see improvements in cerebral blood flow. So does that prove that those people aren't going to go on and develop Alzheimer's disease or that they're going to be protected? It doesn't prove it. But boy, it's like if I had changes in my brain volume and I could reverse that, I'd be interested in doing that, right?
Yeah.
So it seems compelling. And that's on top of literally dozens of studies in mice using almost every available Alzheimer's disease model that's available in mice.
Wow.
And for those of you who don't like mouse models of Alzheimer's disease, in normally aging mice to get cognitive decline, showing that rapamycin can improve or reverse it. Veronica Galvin, another fantastic scientist in the field, and I wrote and she's done a lot of work with rapamycin on cerebral blood flow, Alzheimer's disease models. We wrote a perspective article, it's probably going on 15 years ago now, arguing back then that it was time for clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. And it still hasn't happened, at least nothing other than those small ones that I talked about. So it's a hard challenge because the funders who could fund those kinds of clinical trials for things like, and rapamycin is not the only thing on the list. There are other FDA-approved drugs for other things that would fit this category. The funders who could fund those kinds of things haven't stepped up to do it.
Right.
And so we're left in this middle ground where I become comfortable with the fact that there's going to be uncertainty and you have to do this sort of, okay, has it gotten to the point where confidence is high enough, we understand risk well enough that when we do that risk reward, the reward clearly outweighs the risk. And so for some people with rapamycin, I'm very much there.
Okay.
I'm not to the point where I say everybody should take rapamycin because it might improve your Healthspan. Okay. I do not suggest that everybody takes it.
Okay.
I think where rapamycin seems to be most effective right now are in people who have high levels of chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
And that's a general term.
Okay.
I'm sure there are subgroups within there where certain types of inflammation may not be as responsive to rapamycin as other types of inflammation. We don't yet have the answers to that.
Okay. I have a question for you because I am somebody who has mast cell activation syndrome as a long COVID symptom, and I'm going on 2 years of this mast cell issue.
Yeah.
I take antihistamines every day. Like, I have it somewhat under control, but you can even hear a little bit right now. Like, I'm always a little like stuffed up. And I'm also trying to optimize for fertility.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be a good option for someone like me?
Okay. Not medical advice?
Not medical advice. This is not medical advice.
If you were my daughter,
right,
I'd say, yeah, there's no downside. Very little downside to trying it.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing where, see, one of the challenges with recommending rapamycin as a general Healthspan tool is we don't have good biomarkers for rapamycin to determine whether it's right for you or whether it's helping you. You've got a situation where you're probably going to know if it has a big impact, you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
And so I would say, and I mean, I can share my own experience. Part of the reason why, again, not medical advice, guys. If it was somebody I cared about and they had a condition where I thought it had a good chance of helping, I'd be like, yeah, do it.
Yeah.
This is a no-brainer in my mind.
Right.
So I've taken rapamycin. I take it, 3 months, usually I'll cycle it, and then I'll take 3 to 6 to 9 months off.
Okay.
The reason why I did it the first time was because after a long period of pain and going through the reactive disease care system, was diagnosed with a relatively benign condition called adhesive capsulitis.
Okay.
Frozen shoulder.
Oh, okay.
Anybody in their 50s probably has heard of this. You know somebody who's had this. It's chronic inflammation of the shoulder capsule.
Right.
Super painful. In some people, very dedebilitating.
Right.
I lost probably 95% range of motion. What finally got me to go to the doctor and get it diagnosed was I got to the point where, I wasn't sleeping well. My wife was getting frustrated with me. But I went across the street to throw a ball with my son, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't make the throwing motion. And so anyways, I finally got it diagnosed, and the doc was like, go back to physical therapy, and it might go away in a year. I was shocked. I'm like, I can't live like this for a year. So then I started thinking to myself, and we'd been doing the mouse studies at this point with longevity and oral periodontal disease. I'm like, I know a drug that is really good at knocking down age-related inflammation. This is an age-related inflammatory condition. There are enough people taking it off label. I've got, at this point, we don't have the data set we have now, but there were enough people using it at that point that I had pretty good feel for what dose to try.
Okay.
We'd started the studies in dogs. I haven't talked about that, but we have a clinical trial going on in companion dogs living with their owner right now with rapamycin. So I was like, I have a pretty good feel for the risk reward. And if this works, the reward is way, way higher than the risk. So I did it, and it worked. And can I prove it wasn't placebo effect? That's the challenge with N of 1 experiments. I can't prove it, but I can say this was so painful and it was having such an impact on me that I don't believe that placebo effect would be able to account for what I experienced. Within 10 weeks, 95% range of motion back.
Wow.
Pain was pretty much gone, and it hasn't come back.
And how many years ago was that?
This was 2020.
Okay, so 5 years ago. And why do you is that the general recommendation for those on rapamycin?
There is no general recommendation. Okay. And so again, and part of this is just, a lack of data.
Okay.
Lots of clinics now are prescribing rapamycin. It's been interesting because, I think you said it's a little bit controversial. I think early on, there was a lot of concern among the scientific community in this field, the medical community, certainly, who aren't in this field, about rapamycin in particular because it was approved as an immunosuppressant.
Right.
And the concern was if people started taking rapamycin off label, they'd be getting all sorts of infections and they'd die, right? That didn't happen.
Once again, because it's in the dose.
I'm not making fun of it. Like organ transplant patients can be on rapamycin for many, many years.
Right.
But they do have a depressed immune system because that's what we're trying to do in that context, right?
Right.
As I mentioned, I'm not saying there's no effect on the immune system in terms of increased risk of bacterial infection, but it's not big enough that it has come out in the studies that have been done so far. And on the flip side, it's probably beneficial for viral infection. So it may be a net wash in terms of that concern. So anyways, the rationale for the cycling in my mind was we were doing experiments on mice where I knew 8 to 12 weeks was enough to knock down the inflammation. Joan had already published her experiments on immune function, vaccine response, at 6 weeks. So I was pretty confident that time period would be long enough if it was going to have an effect to see the effect.
And is it a pill you take every day?
So it depends. So organ transplant patients, yes.
Okay.
Most people who are using rapamycin off-label have gravitated to once a week. And again, this largely goes back to Joan's work. So in those studies, they tested daily dosing once a week at 5 milligrams and once a week at 20 milligrams.
Okay.
And what they saw was in terms of vaccine efficacy, you got pretty comparable efficacy in all three groups. But when they looked at the side effects in the 5 milligrams once a week group, the side effects there were lower than in the 20 or the 1 milligram a day group. And they were no different than placebo. So they sort of concluded that this is a reasonable dose for using in people because you still got the efficacy, at least for that endpoint, without any detectable side effects in their study. And that has sort of become the culture, which is problematic because, again, we don't really know whether that's the right dose. And it's probably different for different people and different conditions.
Okay. You mentioned your project, the dog aging project. What's that all about?
Yeah. So the dog aging project is a large-scale observational study primarily to understand what are the most important genetic and environmental factors that influence health outcomes in dogs, pet dogs living in the real world with their owners, not laboratory dogs. There's also a clinical trial, which I alluded to. So the vast majority of the dogs in the dog aging project are observational. We're not asking the owners to do anything different than they normally would. Okay. We have a clinical trial. It is a very, very high quality, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled veterinary clinical trial of rapamycin. There, the goal is to determine does rapamycin slow aging in dogs.
Okay.
And this project for me, so I co-founded the Dog Aging Project more than 10 years ago now with two of my colleagues, Daniel Promislow, who's now at Tufts, and Katie Creevy, who's at Texas A&M University. Katie's a veterinarian. And so for me, this really evolved from a series of conversations with Daniel that we had at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. There used to be a summer course there on the biology of aging. It was a 3-week intensive course where 20 grad students, postdocs would come, basically live on campus and, live learning about the biology of aging. There were faculty lectures from, we would invite 15, 20 of the top scientists in the world. Woods Hole is a great place to go in the summer. It wasn't hard to get people to want to come. So every morning there'd be 2 lectures from top people in the field, and then in the afternoon it's all laboratory. So they were doing both education and learning about methodology. So Daniel and I co-directed that course for a while, and so we spent a lot of time together. And Daniel had already been thinking, he and Katie both had been thinking about, how can we take advantage of the fact that dogs age 7 to 10 times faster than people do. It's this idea that 1 human year is 7 dog years. Okay. All that means is dogs age biologically 7 times faster ballpark than people do.
Right.
So that's very powerful because the fact that they age more quickly than people means we can study aging much more rapidly in dogs.
Right.
So Daniel had been thinking about this. He had a small grant from the NIH to have a few meetings to sort of talk about how could we create a study. So they were very interested in the observational piece. How can we follow dogs and learn about aging? And I am too. I was interested in that. But through these conversations with Daniel, I was actually in Woods Hole, and I'm just sort of sitting there thinking about it, and I had this sort of light bulb moment where I can remember, I said to myself, we know a handful of ways to slow aging in mice.
Right.
We can slow aging 30, 50% with caloric restriction, 25% with rapamycin, 15, 10% with a few other things. Some of those things are going to work in dogs.
Right.
And we can actually test them in a time frame that, I'm still going to be around.
Right.
And hopefully in the prime of my career.
Right.
And I said to myself, literally, oh my God, we could slow aging in dogs. And then I thought of my dog. Sorry, I'm going to tear up because we lost him a year ago and I still can't think about it.
Oh,
but,
I'm so sorry.
I thought of my dog and I'm like, oh my God, I could slow aging in my dog. And so, I'm the kind of person where when I this has to happen, and it was just obvious to me, this has to happen. I'm like, okay, I got to go do it.
Yeah.
And so I set out to figure out, how do we design a clinical trial to the highest standards in companion dogs? What do we test? In my mind, caloric restriction was sort of off the table. If you think about how do we get owners to calorically restrict their dog by 30%.
I was thinking that. That would be very difficult.
Rapamycin is the gold standard. And so I knew that there would be concerns about safety. I was lucky in the sense that there were a couple of veterinary groups, all in the cancer field, testing rapamycin at the time. So they had done some of the early safety studies, knew something about dosing. And again, when you think about designing a clinical trial, especially a clinical trial for healthy longevity in people's pet dogs, it's very much like a pediatric clinical trial. Mm-hmm. You want to be really rock solid sure you're not going to hurt anybody's dog, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we really had to know the safety piece. So I was lucky that was being done at the time. I could talk to those people. They were very kind in sharing their data even before publication. And so then it really just became about, how do we get money to do this? Right? How do we get veterinarians engaged? And that took a lot longer to get to the point that we're at now than I thought it would. And I can come back to this. This was also part of my decision about leaving academia, was how long it took to go from that moment where I'm like, this has to happen, to getting the first NIH grant. It took 5 years.
Yeah.
And to me, it was like, this is completely obvious.
Right.
It still is, in case you can't tell. So I was able to scrape together some money. I had some funds that I had the flexibility to use for whatever I wanted.
Okay.
So between that and a couple of smaller donors, I was able to get enough money to do the first clinical trial, demonstrate safety. We did get an efficacy signal for heart function because the dogs got ultrasounds before and after, but it was a tiny clinical trial. It was really safety.
Okay.
Then after that, as you can imagine, we've gotten a lot of media attention. We got picked up by the New York Times, and that at least helped get the second funding from a foundation called the Donner Family Foundation.
Okay.
They funded a 6-month clinical trial at Texas A&M. So the first one was in Seattle, second one was at Texas A&M. And then during that second clinical trial, we got the first NIH grant to really build the dog aging project. And that grant has allowed us to build the observational piece, 50,000 plus dogs now in the observational piece. Yep. So it's probably the largest study of aging in the world.
And are you still taking dogs as part of the project?
Yeah, people can go to dogagingproject.org.
Awesome.
Take all dogs, all sizes, all ages. It's funny because of the name, some people got confused and they thought, oh, you don't want puppies. No, we want puppies too. We love puppies.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is supposed to be an observational aging of dogs throughout their entire life course.
Yeah, okay.
So the earlier we can get, and we can get genetics, of course, that's not going to change much other than point mutations over the life. But environmental factors, right? We want to know how do early environmental exposures affect long-term health outcomes? So we want dogs all sizes, all breeds, all ages for the observational study. For the clinical trial, once that's fully enrolled, it'll be 580 dogs.
Okay.
For that, there are some entrance criteria. The dogs have to be at least 7 years old, and they have to be between 40 and 110 pounds. And so the reason for that is, number one, big dogs age faster than small dogs. Now, I'm being a little imprecise in my language. They age faster than small dogs in most of the ways that we can measure aging. Right. They get most age-related diseases earlier. They show earlier onset of some of the molecular changes with aging. That might not be true in the brain, so we can come back to that if you want to. It's an interesting side note that suggests aging in the brain might be a little bit different than aging in the rest of the body. Okay. But for our clinical trial, where we're interested in lifespan, big dogs age faster than small dogs. They have shorter lifespans. And so with that size and age entry criteria, we have a population of dogs that over the course of the study are going to experience declines in function, diseases of aging, and mortality. And it's kind of sad to think about, but the only way to demonstrate in a clinical trial that your intervention is increasing lifespan is if a significant fraction of the control dogs die in the clinical trial. So it's a 3-year period that we're following all of the dogs in the clinical trial.
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. I want to enroll my sister's dog. He's like our family dog, and
well, you should definitely get the dog in the Dog Aging Project observational study. And if the dog meets the entrance criteria, I would certainly encourage your sister to nominate her dog.
No, we'll be looking into it. He had a little health scare this week, and I think it's a big eye-opening moment. Yes. You know. Yes. Do you have opinions on metformin?
Yeah, I mean, metformin's a great diabetes drug.
Yep.
I am not one of the people who thinks metformin is a particularly good option for people who don't have metabolic dysfunction. Okay. And I would even add to that, I think there are other options for people who do have metabolic dysfunction that may be as good or better than metformin. Of course, it's going to depend on the individual's particular health condition.
Okay. Would that be like a berberine?
Well, berberine is in many ways an over-the-counter version of metformin.
Right.
Which it's not clear to me why one is prescription other than that's just the way they went through the FDA process, and one is considered generally recognized as safe. But no, I'm thinking like SGLT2 inhibitors, maybe even GLP-1s for the right people. So the reason why I point to SGLT2 inhibitors that differentiates it from metformin in my mind as something that goes beyond a diabetes drug is that SGLT2 inhibitors in laboratory animals increase lifespan. Metformin doesn't really, at least in mice. Okay. This is where there's a little bit of a myth, confusion, ambiguity in the data about metformin. There is it's been sort of put forth as a drug that effectively modifies the biology of aging. The actual data in rodents is much less clear, and I would say the best data suggests that metformin doesn't increase lifespan, probably doesn't robustly improve health span in mice, although there are certainly some signals for better health span in mice. So it's certainly not in the same category as rapamycin, where everybody gets it to work over and over and over. It's a large effect.
Right. Okay.
So from that perspective, to me, SGLT2 inhibitors, given that they also seem to slow aging in mice, I don't know if it's going to slow aging in people, but it might. Okay. And they're really good diabetes drugs, and they probably have other beneficial effects on kidney and heart. We're starting to see that. So,
got it.
So, and then with metformin, there are some concerns that I think are becoming more appreciated. And I don't want to overstate them because metformin is a pretty safe drug. Lots of people have used it for many, many years. But there is some evidence that metformin may blunt the beneficial effects of resistance training.
Yep.
Probably because it targets mitochondria. Metformin is a mitochondrial toxin. That's how it works.
Oh, wow.
At high enough doses, you will kill the electron transport chain.
Oh, wow.
But at low doses, you only slightly affect the electron transport chain. That's probably how it works. That's the other thing about metformin. We don't really know its true mechanism of action.
Oh, really?
It's multiple. Yeah, it's a very dirty drug in the sense that it targets many different things in the cell. So all of that's to say, metformin might blunt your response to resistance training. You should be doing resistance training. You probably don't want to blunt that response.
Right.
And metformin reduces testosterone in at least a subset of men. Again, probably not something you want to be doing in the context of aging. So to my mind, if you're a diabetic, it's a really good diabetes drug. If that's what your doctor prescribes you, great. But I don't see a lot of evidence now for non-diabetics to take metformin. The last thing I'll say on this is there's one study that was published that looked at compared mortality, so risk of dying in diabetics that were taking metformin, diabetics that were not taking metformin, and non-diabetics. And that study sort of got a lot of headlines because it was clear that the diabetics taking metformin lived longer than the diabetics that were not managing their diabetes. Right. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
But that study concluded that there was a little bit of even evidence that diabetics taking metformin might live longer than non-diabetics not taking metformin, which would suggest it might actually be a drug that slows aging. Unfortunately, that study has not been reproducible. I think 2 studies since then have tried to reproduce that finding, and it hasn't held up. So that excited a lot of people, 5-10 years ago, whenever that first study came out. But now I think people are starting to realize, okay, that probably wasn't, at least not robust, and maybe it was an artifact of the way that they did the statistics or something. So all that's to say, it was a long-winded way of saying, I don't tend to advocate for people who are metabolically healthy to take metformin. And again, not medical advice. My first line go-to would probably be an SGLT2 inhibitor as opposed to metformin.
So I feel stupid saying this, but I've never heard of an SGLT2
inhibitor. Yeah, so it inhibits a protein that the SG is sodium glucose.
Okay.
And so this is a protein that transports both sodium and glucose in the kidney. And so basically what you can think of SGLT2 inhibitors as doing is they inhibit this transporter, which basically causes you to pee out glucose that would normally be taken back up into your circulatory system.
Oh.
So it's a pretty clean mechanism for reducing glucose load.
Okay.
The risk of the SGLT2 inhibitors that is real is some people get urinary tract infections. It's certainly not everyone, and it seems, again, I don't have a ton of data to completely back this up, so it's a little bit speculative, but from talking to people, it seems as though the individuals who become more prone to urinary tract infections are either people who have other chronic diseases, so their immune system is presumably already compromised, or people who have a compromised immune system. So I don't think that's a huge concern, but that's the one thing you might be worried about with SGLT2 inhibitors.
That's interesting.
The nice thing there, and I alluded to the fact that with rapamycin, we don't have great biomarkers to tell, is it working for you?
Right.
The nice thing with SGLT2 inhibitors, we have a really, really good biomarkers. You look at fasting glucose, you wear a CGM. Even better, you look at insulin sensitivity, and often it will get better. So I'm pretty bullish on SGLT2 inhibitors.
I love that. Do you take one?
I do.
You do?
I started about 4 months ago. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have diabetes, but and again, I'm one of these people. I'm in my mid-50s, so there are a lot of people like this, where I've done a lot with my lifestyle. My lifestyle is, at least compared to what it was, really clean. I eat a really high-quality diet, exercise regularly, get reasonably good sleep, have human relationships. I'm not super stressed out. So I feel like I've got that relatively dialed in.
Yeah.
And yet, my biomarkers are not optimal.
Okay.
What's going on, right? They're not terrible, but my fasting glucose was typically, on the borderline, not pre-diabetic, but if it went up 3 or 4 more units, might be in that range. So it made sense to me, if I've got a little bit of metabolic dysregulation, especially after doing as much as I reasonably think I can do with lifestyle, try the SGLT2 inhibitor.
Yeah.
So I've been on about 4 months, haven't really noticed anything, except my biomarkers are going the direction I want them to. A1C's down, average glucose levels are down, insulin sensitivity's up a little bit, and I have glucose in my urine. So it's doing what it's supposed to.
That's great.
Yeah.
Would that help with weight loss at all as well, or not really?
It does for some people, yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't taking it for any weight loss effects, but some people...
I'm just thinking if your body's not reuptaking glucose...
some people see weight loss. Yep.
Oh, very interesting.
Not to the extent of GLP-1 inhibitors.
Okay.
Or GLP-1 agonists, I mean.
Right.
So it's not a weight loss drug like they are, but some people will experience some weight loss. That's also true for metformin.
Right. I remember, because that was when I was diagnosed with PCOS at 16, so 15 years ago. The first thing my doctor did was put me on metformin. I didn't see any weight loss with it. I was simultaneously put on hormonal birth control, which maybe I would have gained weight because of that.
Sure, yeah.
And maybe it just allowed me to gain less weight. But that's very interesting. I haven't heard of that before, so I'll definitely look into that just for my own knowledge.
Yeah, and I think, we are unlikely to have definitive data on any of these or other interventions for health span or longevity in people in the near term. Because we don't have really reliable biomarkers to tell us whether they're working, and it takes a really long time to do the clinical trials. So I think we have to just try to evaluate the information that we've got and put probabilities on these things. So one interesting thing about the SGLT2 inhibitors is there was a study done out of the UK Biobank where basically they compared all prescription medications that were in UK Biobank, and they tried to look at all the people who were taking that medication. Of course, it's dirty because some people were taking many, many medications, right? But for every medication, look at the people who are taking that medication and then try to match them to people who are of a similar health status. Also really hard. So they did the best they could. But they did that for all of the prescriptions where they had more than, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 prescriptions on record. So rapamycin wasn't in this group, unfortunately. But they came up with several that seemed to have a signal that the people taking those drugs compared to health-matched people were living longer, had lower mortality. SGLT2 inhibitors were in that group.
Really?
Yep. Interestingly, so were estrogens. And in mice, a couple of different estrogens extend lifespan, at least in male mice. These were, of course, women.
Male mice?
Yeah. These were, of course, women taking the estrogens.
Right. I was just going to say they weren't giving that to men, right? Okay.
But it's sort of these interesting intersect points between the laboratory basic biology of aging, preclinical science, and human data.
So interesting.
And the number of prescription drugs that were in this set was small, right? There were a couple of SGLT2 inhibitors. There were 3 or 4 estrogens in there. So it was an overlap that, without doing statistics, to me seems obviously statistically significant.
Right.
Overlap.
Very, very interesting. What are the top 3 things you think people can do to improve their health span?
Well, I mean, I'll just put lifestyle as one. We talk about, nutrition, exercise, sleep quality, connection, which I put both meaningful social relationships.
Yes.
And your own sort of personal feeling of connection, purpose, mindfulness, right?
Okay.
So put those together. So we put that as one category. Obviously, for each individual, which of those is going to be most impactful is going to depend on you, right? And having seen enough people in our programs now, I can kind of bucket people. There are certain phenotypes out there, but it's very individual, and there's not a one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to lifestyle.
Okay.
So outside of that, I mean, I think the specific sort of medical interventions are going to be very individual. So I would just say take control of your own health.
Okay.
Right, as a general thing. And I think most people don't do that. And by that, I mean, become educated as best you can, be willing to invest time, money in your health, right? I think in the United States, sometimes people have this attitude where, well, if insurance doesn't pay for it, I'm not going to do it. And I get that. And your health is the most important thing to you and your loved ones. You should be willing to put some resources towards it. So take control of your health as best you can. Find a good doctor. I know that's easier said than done. But that's one big thing I think a lot of people can do.
Yeah.
And then I guess, the other ones, it feels sort of touchy-feely, but I mean, I think really we don't spend enough time thinking about how much fun, joy you're having, right? I mean, I think... And again, for different people, it's going to be different. Having a sense of purpose, feeling good about yourself and your life is so important for health span, because health span is more than just not being sick or not having disease. And so from my perspective, spending some time really identifying what brings you joy and investing there is something that everybody can do and probably should do.
I love that you say that. Because it is. In this world, we can get, obviously you are so scientific in the way that you approach everything, but really taking a step back and observing, I think, once again, kind of just applying that common sense lens to things and seeing the people that live the longest and the healthiest.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing? I'm going to put a fourth thing on
Sure.
there. Again, I think people sort of get this, but they don't always really think about how to approach it. And all of these things are tied together. But I think also recognizing whether you are managing stress well. And I say this because this has become such a larger societal problem, I think, certainly in the last 10 years, that I think a lot more people are chronically overstressed, and we have not learned how to manage that.
Yes.
We're not going to get rid of stress, but we definitely can do better at managing it. And we can reduce the things that are driving our anxiety and stress. And so it's going to be very individual, but first of all, understanding, is your life being negatively impacted to a significant extent by poor management of stress and chronic stress and anxiety? And if so, what are the causes of that chronic stress and anxiety? And then if you can, reducing or removing those. And if you can't, how can you live with it? How can you manage it? And again, I don't have all the answers, but there are some general strategies. Like I think, again, for a lot of people I know, I have intentionally dramatically reduced my consumption of social media and news, and especially anything to do with politics.
Yeah.
Just not healthy right now.
Same.
I want to know generally what's going on so I can be informed without being drawn into all of that. And so I think for a lot of people, that feeds the anxiety and the fear and the stress. And so, just back off. You don't need that. You can spend your time more productively.
Yeah, couldn't agree with that more. Before we wrap up, I have a quick rapid fire round.
Okay.
Do you drink caffeine or alcohol at all?
Yes. Although I drink a lot of caffeine. And I actually think, again, this is going to be individual. The data on caffeine is pretty consistent that caffeine consumption is associated with a variety of health benefits and reduced all-cause mortality.
Oh, thank God.
So I drink a lot of caffeine, not because I think it's going to slow aging or make me live longer, but I like coffee. So.
Yeah, just because you want to function at a high level.
But I will say, I drink black coffee. Okay. And I generally think it's a good strategy to try to avoid empty calories in your drinks, especially in all of your diet, but especially your drinks, which brings me to alcohol, which is empty calories in your drinks. So I have dramatically reduced the amount of alcohol that I consume. I think like a lot of people during the pandemic, my alcohol consumption kind of went through the roof.
Yeah.
And I've made a very active effort to limit alcohol consumption. But I'm not one of these people who says, never drink alcohol. I think especially if it's socially, if it helps you socially connect with people.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should demonize alcohol to the point where it's like it's never okay to have alcohol and you should feel bad if you drink a glass of wine or whatever. That's not. I don't. At least I don't.
It comes back to that joy piece. For me, I'm like, what is yes, should I be drinking a glass of wine every day at home with my husband? No, that's not necessary. But if I can't be at a wedding enjoying a cocktail with my friends, what is life about? Or
even my wife and I don't go out to eat dinner that often.
Right.
But when we do, if we want to have a glass of wine or two,
right.
Great.
Right. Yeah. We use the weekend rule. If it's the weekend, sure, but during the week, it's not necessary.
So I guess this also raises the question, is there any value to alcohol? I mean, it's hard to make a compelling, I'm not going to argue that alcohol has health benefits, but I will say, when you take an unbiased look at the data, there does appear to be a signal, at least for all-cause mortality, where it's what's called a J-shaped curve. And I'm going to get some heat, and I know Peter Attia disagrees with this. I actually think the way Peter and others are interpreting this data is not, I'll say it's ambiguous. I think it's wrong, but they could be right. But in any case, you look at the data, there's a J-shaped curve where people who drink 0 drinks of alcohol a day have higher all-cause mortality risk than people who drink 1 to 2 drinks of alcohol.
Per day?
Yeah.
Really?
This is where this idea of moderate, it's 1 for women, 2 for men.
Okay.
This idea of moderate consumption of alcohol. It's dirty data. Human data is always dirty.
Yeah.
And you can make the argument that, maybe the reason why the people who aren't drinking at all is because they're sick and they can't drink anymore. I mean, maybe. But I have not seen a quality analysis that demonstrates that. And there are reasons to think that low levels of alcohol may have, and again, I'm not suggesting you drink for health benefits from alcohol, because that's not established either. But it is not crystal clear that no alcohol is better overall for health than a small amount of alcohol. Now, what is a small amount? And again, we're talking international drinks, not American drinks. I don't know how big your wine glasses are, but
I was just about to say
one international drink is not a lot of alcohol compared to what many people have gotten used to in the United States.
Well, it reminds me of the blue zone studies of, a lot of the blue zones.
Those are problematic too, but yes, you're right.
But it's part of that well-balanced Mediterranean lifestyle.
Right.
And I would be shocked if that 1 to 2 drinks wasn't correlated with social connection.
It absolutely.
And just overall life
and
enjoyment.
Mealtime, spending time with
Yeah.
meals. Yeah. And I mean, again, there are plausible biological connections here. I don't know if you've ever worn a CGM.
I have.
But a lot of people will notice if you have a glass of wine before bed, your blood glucose is lower all night long. Now, that's because of the way your liver is metabolizing the alcohol. And it may or may not be a good thing, but it is a real thing. But the flip side is alcohol will degrade your quality of sleep. Unless you are somebody who is way outside the normal curve, almost everybody, alcohol will degrade your quality of sleep. So is one night of a little bit lower sleep a problem? Probably not a big one.
Right.
But if you're drinking every day and getting low quality sleep, that's going to add up. So, I think it's a more nuanced and it's funny because the pendulum sort of swings on alcohol and it feels like there's been a dedicated effort to demonize alcohol. And maybe that's not a bad thing. At the societal level, would we be better off if alcohol just didn't exist? Yeah, you can probably make a pretty compelling argument we would.
For sure. Yeah, especially for American society. Yeah. We definitely take things to an extreme, I lived in New York for many years and it's so ingrained as part of the culture, and it's typically not, if you're drinking 1 to 2. It's, most people are drinking significantly more than that.
And I don't think there's any question that binge drinking is associated with a lot of bad health outcomes, especially if you do it regularly.
Yes. All right. Well, coffee daily is good. Alcohol daily, not so good. Maybe it is good. But I'm happy to hear about the caffeine. You're on a desert island. What's the one supplement you're taking with you? Or pharmaceutical?
Where in the world is it? It depends on how much sunlight there is, whether I'm going to bring vitamin D.
We'll say it's sunny.
Yeah, I would. And presumably there's going to be lots of fish around, so I get my omega-3s. Creatine is what I'm going with.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. Wearables like Aura or Whoop, yay or nay?
Yay. I'm not going to say the specific brands, right? Because I think there's, it depends on the person again. I'm going to wear my Apple Watch.
Oh, great.
I use it. Great. I don't use it for a lot, but I use it to track my steps and my workouts and things like that. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while I'll look in the health app and see how my heart rate variability and VO2 max, even though the VO2 max on mine is terrible, my VO2 max on the phone is way different from if I do it on a Cosmet, like the real VO2 max assessment.
I've heard that the wearable VO2 max
just be careful in not taking those numbers too literally or seriously, recognizing that they're estimates in a sense.
Yeah. AirPods or wireless headphones? Or I'm sorry, wired headphones.
Oh, wireless.
Wireless?
Headphones, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't like the AirPods. I like the kind that are made for working out, so they kind of wrap around the ear.
Got it.
That's what works for me. But
yeah,
I don't want wired headphones.
Do you think we need to be concerned about the wireless? You
mean like the radiation, the Bluetooth, or
Yeah.
No. I mean, so I was a bit too glib. I don't think there's any real reason to be overly concerned.
Okay.
And there's not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah.
We are being bombarded.
Yeah.
all the time. So
I feel like that's one of those things that's being really dramatized right now. It's like, don't wear your AirPods, don't wear your wireless headphones. It's frying your brain.
Yeah. I mean, look, the influencers need to stay relevant. So one person jumps on it and then they all parrot each other.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Okay, good. I'm happy to hear that one too.
There are more important things to spend your anxiety credits on than that.
Speaking of influencers, what is one biohack that you think is overrated?
Most of them are overrated. I think a lot of these biohacks can have value for certain people, but the idea that everybody should be doing cold plunge, or everybody should be doing red light therapy, or everybody should be doing penile shock therapy. I mean, these things work for some people, right?
Right.
I had a famous biohacker. Should I tell this story?
Tell it.
I had a famous biohacker who I went on the podcast.
Yep.
Great guy, by the way. Really like him. And he showed me his penile shock therapy device and offered to let me use it, and I declined.
I would guess who that is.
So in any case, there's a short list of things I think that have clear value for a number of people. Like sauna is great. Like I'm not against sauna at all. I think it's been way overemphasized. Like the value you get from it and the importance of sauna has been way overemphasized in the influencer world. So I think a lot of these things are directionally correct.
Yeah.
But people just take it way, way too far. And again, it's part of that cycle of these people have to feel like they need to stay relevant. They're generally not trained in critical thinking or science. Mm-hmm. And, they listen to each other. They go on each other's podcasts. They just start saying it over and over. And so something where there might be an increment, and Sauna has more than an increment of data, but something where there might be an increment of data, very suggestive, suddenly becomes this thing that everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
So.
No, it is. These things, I mean, they're trendy, like it's even the term biohacking is trendy.
Yeah. It is, although I would say, if you take a supplement, you're biohacking, right?
True.
You are taking, in most cases, there are a few cases, vitamin D, omega-3, B vitamins, where we can measure them and we know somewhat what the optimal range is.
Right.
So there's a really good rationale for taking them. Vast majority of supplements, we don't know if they work.
Yeah, that's so true.
We certainly don't know if they work for you.
Yeah.
And you're trying to modify your biology by taking an experimental therapy. Mm-hmm. It's just nobody thinks about supplements that way, but that's what it is.
Yeah. Any biohacks that you think are underrated?
No, I guess I can't think of a biohack. I think there are some strategies that you hear talked about where you can improve your health that for whatever reason people still don't think a lot about or do. And these are sort of obvious to a lot of people, but a lot of people don't look at labels. Like that's an obvious one. Mm-hmm. You go to the store, look at the label. Mm-hmm. If it has added sugars, think twice about whether you want to buy that thing, right? So it's sort of easy, and it's not the kind of thing that all the influencers are going to be talking about, but that can have a way bigger impact on your health than doing cold plunge.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one that I think is underrated. Another one, we talked about the oral cavity, is take care of your teeth. Yeah. Right.
Huge.
So those are biohacks, but I do think they don't get the attention that they deserve in a world that is hyper focused on some of these other things.
I think that's a great advice. All right. Our last one. What is the future headline you hope to read about aging science?
Rapamycin increases lifespan in dogs.
Love. I have a feeling you're going to get that headline.
Well, here's what I would say. I don't know whether rapamycin, and so there's two ways to think about a clinical trial, right? One is, does the intervention itself work?
Right.
The way you hope it works. The other is, did you design the clinical trial properly so you can detect that? So while I'm cautiously optimistic that rapamycin slows aging in dogs, we might have made a mistake in the way we designed the clinical trial where we're not going to be able to detect it.
Okay.
So that's what sort of, is in my mind when I'm trying not to get my hopes up maybe. But what I would say is part of the reason for building the initial dog aging project clinical trial component was because I believed early on that by doing so, we could show other people this is a path, this is doable, this is how you design this kind of clinical trial. Oh, and it can be done, and it can be done in a few years, and it's not going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And so I feel very gratified that we're starting to see that play out with companies like Loyal, who are now going through the FDA approval process, for-profit company. Dog Aging Project is all nonprofit academic. They're going through the for-profit path to FDA approval of what may be the first drug approved to slow aging. Wow. That's a big freaking deal.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a pretty good chance they're going to get conditional approval next year. And I know for certain that the Dog Aging Project and our rapamycin clinical trial had a big role to play in them getting to this point. And so even if rapamycin doesn't work, somebody is going to be successful at doing this. And that to me, I wish it was now, but it will happen eventually. And I'll be really, really happy when that happens.
That's awesome. Where can people find you and all of your various projects?
So I'm pretty easy to find. So I'd say the best place to check out more of our content is the Optispan podcast. So we've got a podcast that's been going for a year and a half now.
Nice.
Where we talk about a lot of topics around the science of longevity.
Yeah.
So people should definitely check that out. And then I'm moderately active on social media. I have a love-hate relationship with X, mostly on the hate side right now. Getting more active on Instagram.
Yeah.
So my handle on both of those is @mKaeberlein. So my first initial last name.
Awesome. And Optispan, is that optispan.com?
Optispan.life.
Optispan.life.
Yeah, for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And then on YouTube, it's just the Optispan podcast. So OPTISPAN.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
This podcast was brought to you by Pureform, a comprehensive wellness center in Boca Raton, Florida. The website is pureformhealth.com, or you can find us on Instagram @pureformhealth. Feel free to message us with any questions, and note that you can connect with our providers for consultations over Zoom from everything from stem cell therapy to hormone replacement therapy and peptide therapy. That's it for this episode of the Healthspan Collective. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and send it to a friend. We'd also love to connect with you on Instagram. Follow the podcast at Healthspan Collective and me at Nicole J. Doran. And leave us a comment on our latest post, letting us know what you'd like us to cover next.